So long as the seeing is something to see, it is not the real seeing. When seeing is no seeing, there is real seeing. In the modern world, many people feel like their life has no purpose and that there is no reason for them to keep on living. When they tell others about their suffering and their thirst for meaning, they often hear phrases like, "Life is beautiful, you just don't see its beauty," or "You need to stop thinking in such a pessimistic way." Phrases like this imply that the person who sees life as meaningless is wrong, and that the quote-unquote correct way of seeing life is seeing it as meaningful and not meaningless. But oftentimes, such advice can make the struggling person feel left out, because everyone around them says that their perception of life is simply wrong and that they need to change themselves in order to be happy again. But Buddhism has a completely different approach to the purposelessness of life. It neither affirms nor negates the existence of such thing as the meaning of our existence. According to an ancient Buddhist text called the Lankavatara Sutra, one of the characteristics of the highest state of enlightenment is the enlightened person not having a sense of purpose. Such a person doesn't do things because they have a purpose behind it, but they simply do it. Those wonderful, unthinkable deeds issuing from spiritual freedom are technically called deeds performed with no sense of utility, or the deeds of no purpose, as referred to elsewhere, and mean the perfection of Buddhist life. This statement may come off as counterintuitive, as the default mode of our thinking suggests that it is better to have purpose than not to have it. But yet again, Buddhism proves our logic to be wrong. When the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, achieved enlightenment, he is said to have been fully satisfied. He achieved what he wanted to achieve. He had no more wishes, no more desires. We often speak of enlightenment as a state in which a person feels no more pain, because of the absolute absence of desire, which is the source of all suffering. But doesn't the lack of desire mean the lack of meaning? If one doesn't want anything, then that person has no reason to do anything. Doesn't it mean that that person has no reason to live? Following that line of thought, the Buddha could have just sat still under the tree until he died. There was no reason for him to get up, but yet he stood up and continued on living. The logical question to ask is why. We may find the answer in the way that Gautama conducted himself after his enlightenment. The Buddha was not a metaphysician and naturally avoided discussing such subjects as were strictly theoretical and had no practical bearing on the attainment of nirvana. He thus took the world as it was, that is, he interpreted it as it appeared to his religious insight and according to his own valuation. He called his way of looking at the world and life Dharma. From these quotes we can deduce that the Buddha standing up from under the tree had its source in the perspective of life he attained in enlightenment. The Buddha evidently had quite a pragmatic conception of the intellect and left many philosophical problems unsolved, as unnecessary for the attainment of the final goal of life. This was quite natural with him. Whilst he was still alive among his disciples, he was the living illustration of all that was implied in his doctrine. The Dharma was manifest in him in all its vital aspects, and there was no need to indulge in idle speculation as to the ultimate meaning of such concepts as Dharma, Nirvana, Atman, Karma, or body. The Buddha's personality was the key to the solution of all these. If the Buddha's personality is the key to answering all philosophical questions, then it also must be the answer to the question, what is the purpose of life? So, logically, to find the purpose of life, we need to find the Buddha's true personality. This is exactly the line of thinking that the first Buddhist monks, right after the Buddha's death, followed. Here is the conclusion they arrived at. They finally found out that enlightenment was not a thing exclusively belonging to the Buddha, but that each one of us could attain it if he got rid of ignorance by abandoning the dualistic conception of life and of the world. We can ask ourselves, why did the Buddha leave the body tree? But to truly answer that question, we would have to fully know Siddhartha Gautama's true character, which is obviously not possible. The answer is not really the Buddha's personality, but it is the personality of each human being individually. And if we want to uncover the meaning of life, Each one of us has to discover their own true personality. Here, things get quite complicated. According to Buddhist thought, a person's true personality can only be grasped through the abandonment of the dualistic way of perceiving the world. But the notion of there being such things as one's true and not true personality is a dualistic point of view. Hence, the true personality cannot be found by looking for one's true personality. Or, in other words, a person's purpose in life cannot be found by looking for a purpose in life, and it can only be found when a person doesn't believe that there is such a thing as the presence or absence of purpose. When Vimalakirti was asked by Sariputra how such a small room as his, with just one seat for himself, could accommodate all the hosts of bodhisattvas and arhats and devas, numbering many thousands, who were coming here with Manjusri to visit the sick philosopher, replied Vimalakirti, "Are you here to seek chairs or the Dharma? One who seeks the Dharma finds it in seeking for nothing." In this quote, Vimalakirti, one of the Buddha's disciples, exclaims that the Dharma is to be found by not trying to find it. This seems not to make any sense, but things making sense or not making sense are also a dualistic way of perceiving the world. And as said before, to find purpose, duality needs to be abandoned. Vimalakirti explained that for those who understand the doctrine of spiritual emancipation, even the Mount of Sumeru could be sealed up in a seed of mustard, and the waves of the four great oceans could be made to flow into one pore of the skin. One may ask, when duality is abandoned, what is left? Is non-duality basically the annihilation of the world and everything we know about it? At first it may seem so, but take this quote. They further concluded that nirvana was not vanishing into a state of absolute non-existence, which was an impossibility as long as we had to reckon with the actual facts of life, and that nirvana, in its ultimate signification, was an affirmation beyond opposites of all kinds. According to this quote, when duality is abandoned, the only thing that still remains is the world that we live in. No matter if one has the perspective of duality or singularity, they still have to deal with the actual facts of life. No matter our state of mind, we still exist in this world. We still need to sleep, eat, and many other things. The only difference between the dualistic and the nirvana state of mind is the way that we perceive what happens in our lives. The dualistic perception may tell us that our life either has or doesn't have a purpose, and the perception of all things being one tells us that purpose is but an illusion created by the logical mind. But when a person lives their whole life thinking that it has a purpose, they may never find that it is in fact an illusion, and there is nothing wrong with that. But if you don't feel like your life has a purpose, in a sense you are just like the Buddha. In his youth he felt exactly the same way. That's why he left his life as a wealthy prince and embarked on a journey to find the purpose of life. For many years his search was unsuccessful. He gave up, simply sat under a tree and meditated. That was when he achieved enlightenment and realized that purpose or the lack of purpose are just ideas made up by the human logical mind. He found that no purpose is needed at all. The only reason we ask for it is because in this world we are conditioned to think logically in every single situation. This will be best illustrated by the story of King Ravana. When King Ravana was requesting the Buddha through the Bodhisattva Mahamati to disclose the content of his inner experience, the king unexpectedly noticed his mountain residence turned into numberless mountains of precious stones and most ornately decorated with celestial grandeur, and on each of these mountains he saw the Buddha manifested. And before each Buddha there stood King Ravana himself with all his assemblage, as well as all the countries in the 10 quarters of the world. And in each of those countries there appeared the Tathagata, before whom again there were King Ravana, his families, his palaces, his gardens, all decorated exactly in the same style as his own. There was also the Bodhisattva Mahamati in each of these innumerable assemblies, asking the Buddha to declare the content of his inner spiritual experience. And when the Buddha finished his discourse on the subject, with hundreds of thousands of exquisite voices, the whole scene suddenly vanished, and the Buddha with all his bodhisattvas and his followers were no more. Then King Ravana found himself all alone in his old palace. He now reflected. Who was he that asked the question? Who was he that listened? What were those objects that appeared before me? Was it a dream or a magical phenomenon? He again reflected. Things are all like this. They are all creations of one's own mind. When mind discriminates, there is manifoldness of things, but when it does not, it looks into the true state of things. When he thus reflected, he heard voices in the air and in his own palace, saying, "Well you have reflected, O king. You should conduct yourself according to this view." In the king's case, as well as the Buddha's case, feeling like his life had no purpose was the first step to finding out the truth of reality. The truth which exclaims that all things are like this, they are a creation of one's own mind. Having no purpose in life is the first step to realizing that no purpose at all is needed, and that the presence or absence of purpose are both only illusions of the mind. An individual, quote-unquote, finds purpose by doing away with the notion of purpose. The quote from the beginning of the video, "So long as the seeing is something to see, it is not real seeing. When seeing is no seeing, there is real seeing," can also be interpreted. So long as you see a purpose, it is not the real purpose. When your purpose is no purpose, there is real purpose.